Afternoon and welcome to the Preservation Association of Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name's Eileen Burke and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. Our videotaping today is sponsored by the Historic Preservation Fund of the U.S. Department of the Interior through the Nebraska State Historical Society and the City of Lincoln, a certified local government. Our speaker today is Ed Zimmer. Ed was the Historic Preservation Planner in Lincoln's city and county government from 1985 to 2020. Since retiring, Ed remains an active community historian and volunteer. He recently has finished 2 books, the 3rd and final volume of the Near South Walking Tour book, and also a book on Lincoln postcards with Jim McKee. Ed is native to Omaha, Nebraska, and has an undergraduate degree from Lindenwood College and a PhD from Boston University. Ed's talk today is, and the winner is PAL's Triennial Awards. This is the award program that we gave, or that we handed for our to our community about a month ago. So Ed's going to talk about it today. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Ed.
Thank you, Eileen. Usually this is PAL's annual award program, but in the pandemic, we don't know what year it is. So I couldn't count quite 28th, 29th, 30th. It got difficult. And also couldn't decide exactly how to spell triennial. There are at least 2 good spellings of it, and I think we've also used a third. But it's either 3 times a year, and that's not at all what happened, or once every 3 years, and that is what happened this time, of a meeting on June 26, 2022. So it's the Triennial Award Program. And we held it this year at Sky Park Manor, a recently rehabilitated early 1960s building, 13th and Lincoln Mall. And we had a wonderful tour of the building, as well as a meeting in the parking garage of the building, which actually was a very suitable, clean, beautifully rehabbed space, and still an active parking garage. I love this postcard because it shows somebody's fanciful notion that they might mount Sky Park Manor sign up on the top of the building, maybe to be viewed from the Capitol, because if you're familiar with the building, they flipped the postcard over and put the parking garage on the wrong side, so you could read Sky Park Manor on the printed postcard. Maybe it's like one of those rare stamps or double struck pennies and has extreme value. And I have that postcard, but I doubt it. The building is beautifully rehabbed and now available for what its original purpose was, luxury apartments downtown, right in the neighborhood of the Capitol. A little quick looking back at its history, there originally was a Victorian era mansion on the site. I think it was E.E. Brown's house originally, early mayor of Lincoln, and then towards the end it was the Folsom property. And both the old building and the architect's drawing for the new building appeared in a 1960 Journal Star article. If you know the building, that's not exactly how it was built, nor is the postcard exactly how it was built. Of course, it was evolving in the final decisions up to the construction. Here is the nicely attended meeting being held in the parking garage, first story. It really worked very well. And what the meeting began with was a very nice video from John Sampson, owner and Sampson Construction Company boss, talking about how meaningful this building was to him and how he'd always had his eye on it and finally had the opportunity to put it back in the condition that it deserved, just a block from the Capitol. Now, at the beginning of the meeting, before we got to the PAL Awards, Sean Flowerday, County Commissioner, visited and delivered to our own Eileen Burke what's called a Heritage Hero Award. In addition to his county board responsibilities, Sean is on the Board of Trustees of History Nebraska, aka Nebraska State Historical Society, and was giving her the award for an unsung hero, unsung volunteer. So we're singing Eileen's praises, and she got for this a nice certificate and this huge, huge lapel pin, just about that size. But if you're going to be an unsung hero, you have to have a nice little discreet lapel pin. So we've got Eileen and her full-sized pin honoring her. And she in particular was being honored for her work with PAL. She's coordinated these brown bag programs for over 3 decades now. And we can count, well, we're coming on 3 decades. We can count over 300 presentations. Every month until the pandemic, Eileen would find somebody, sometimes me, to come and present these. I thought I was sort of in the bullpen, that if Eileen got to that final date and she didn't have somebody lined up, she would call and say, is there something you could talk about? We would come up with something. So I don't know if we've ever done a count of how many of the 300 plus I've done, but it would be,
I could figure it out.
it would be a few, a large few. And very nicely, also at the beginning, Eileen and Pal gave me this lovely Joel Sartori photograph of one of my favorite presidents, the Gettysburg Lincoln, on the west side of the Capitol, in recognition of my retirement. So that hangs proudly in my office at home. Now, PAL has done this awards program from the very beginning as well, and PAL goes back to 1993, which is why Eileen looks a little alarmed if I say she's done this for 30 years, because I'm adding an extra one on there. But now we have this full roster of 7 awards that PAL gives annually, and we're going to look through those for who was awarded in 2022. We know what year this happened. We don't know always what year we're honoring, because we didn't get to have a meeting since back to 2019. We missed 20 and 21. It begins with the Stewardship Award, and this one looks for a particularly significant property that has a long tradition of good stewardship by its owner occupant, and looked this year to the new City Hall building in the old former town of University Place. This is how it was advertised in University Place News in 1915, sitting there on what was called Warren Avenue. Warren Avenue was the University Place name for North 48th Street. Warren was a retired Methodist bishop, and in this Methodist town, Warren Avenue was the main street. But on one side of Warren Avenue was N Street, and the other side of Warren Avenue was P Street. So it was, in effect, the O Street of University Place. But running north-south, if you followed that all the way down, there would be a point somewhere down south that N Street met N Street of University Place met N Street of Lincoln, and P Street met P Street. But when the University Place was annexed in 1926, the names were normalized to flow with the Lincoln names, and Warren became North 48th. And the City Hall, former City Hall building, which included in this 1914-1915 building, the fire station, the mayor's office, the city council office, a single jail cell, and a meeting room for a little public meeting room auditorium upstairs in the building. Now, since the founding in 1987, University Place Art Center, now called Lux Art Center, has been operating in the building and bringing art programs, displays, activities, teaching into the heart of the University Place community. They've expanded from the City Hall building itself into where the sign says art classes. That was originally a bakery. The city of Lincoln, after the annexation, used the old City Hall as a fire station for years. I think a fire station with a bakery right next door seems like a very natural fit. And in fact, when the building was designated a City of Lincoln landmark, we included the classroom building beside it, the former bakery, the limestone building of the 50s. The program has also expanded to another building to the west, which is now the Ceramics Center for the program, and also really to that whole section, and there are beautiful murals up and down North 48th Street, and then a van that takes the program out and beyond the building. So the program is very active, and we have a lovely program of murals, many of the side walls of the buildings up and down North 48th, including this an international series of murals were painted just a couple of years ago in this neighborhood and beyond, sponsored by the Art Center. This is Wadey White of Omaha, who did a series of these, a series they called 100 People. Not all 100 are in University Place, but that group are. So the Stewardship Award for this cycle went to the Lux Center for the Arts, and we were very pleased that Joe Shaw, the executive director, attended the meeting and received his plaque of recognition there. Next in the program was the Commercial Institutional Rehabilitation Award, and this one typically isn't a recent, or it is a more recent rehab typically than stewardship is something that's been operating a long time. This really looks for something that's a kind of a new project, and PAL recognized the lovely work that's gone on the south side of 8th and O, both east and west corners, on two of the most significant historic buildings in Haymarket, these large grocery wholesale houses of the 1880s that had both survived, but for many years it seemed like Haymarket kind of ended at the overpass. And even though there were these fine buildings on the south side of the intersection, there wasn't as much activity, or there hadn't been rehab until the late first decade of the 21st century. And they were looking at buildings that had great survival of historic features, including lots of cast iron work. The Hargrave building on the west side had formerly used this Poly brand and bright parrot on their grocery items, and the cast iron work of the storefronts on both buildings carry the trademark of Seton and Lee, Atchison, Kansas, which you should read as Seton and Lee, Lincoln, Nebraska, because up at 8th and Q, where Leadbelly's is, was the foundry that was producing most of these storefronts in mid-20th century or mid-1880s Lincoln. There is one piece of cast iron down under the overpass that says Seton and Lee, Lincoln, Nebraska, which would mean it was a new mold, not shipped up from Kansas and cast here, because you wouldn't ship all the ironwork up when you got a foundry at 8th and Q. You'd ship up the old molds from Kansas, and they still had the old insignia. If you go to Red Cloud, you can see lots of Seton and Lee, Lincoln, Nebraska signs on the storefronts of Red Cloud coming out of that 8th and Q corner. And these still are there in the rehab. Upper floor on the Hargrave building, or what we would call a Schwarz building. Schwarz paper was in that building from the early 20th century, almost a century long. Right across the street was the Raymond Brothers grocery wholesale house, and the whole storefront is intact there as well. And the two buildings side by side under the overpass really had that great Victorian character, but not a lot of activity, unless you were buying paper goods or cleaning supplies from Schwarz paper, or you were maneuvering your car around their semi that was pulled up to their docks. Now both buildings have been lovingly rehabbed with commercial space on the lower floor and condominiums above. This is the Schwarz paper building, where before the rehab I had the opportunity to go through it, and they had inserted mezzanine floors on the first and second levels, because those floor levels were so high they could store things up on these little sort of matchbook mezzanines that were so low the beams were labeled duck or die. Eileen wouldn't have been able to fit up there at all. She could fit on the first level, but not up on the mezzanine. All of that's been opened up, and these lovely high floor levels on the first and second. The third floor on the Schwarz is an original floor, and the fourth floor was added in the early 20th century when they had burned off the roof and the upper floor and rebuilt it as 4 stories. Across the street, Raymond has also been rehabbed, and that big cornice that was full of pigeons and their nests and the other things that pigeons leave behind and was rotting away. It looked like it was all pressed metal work, but in fact had been assembled from tiny pieces of metal all soldered up together, and then was rusting away and trying to fall off. It's all been replaced with a very careful replica in a modern but more durable material, colored to match the what would have been a galvanized color of the original cornice. So from the south, we now have a bold new entrance to Haymarket with lovely rehab buildings on both sides, lights going on at night in the condos, and there's a restaurant working on installing in the Raymond Brothers building on the east side. Now if you turn around to look the other way on 8th Street, you still maybe are kind of blocked away from those, but I think with the new activity and knowing there's people down there, this is how I see it. The overpass is still there. You won't fall off if you drive across it. This is just how I see it. So honoring BIC Construction, Craig Geese and his partners who did both buildings, and we were always encouraged to see somebody tackle one, and then from what they've learned and from what they've not learned, go on and do a second one. We now have in great shape both of these important buildings at the south edge of Haymarket, and kind of leading into the rehab activity we're starting to see down in what we might call South Haymarket till it gets all done, and then we can just call it all Haymarket. But in the old College of Architecture studies of the area dating back to 1965, they called this Mission Square south of O and Haymarket Square north of O. I don't know that we're going to resuscitate the Mission Square down below because I'm not sure what it would refer to, but maybe it was People City Mission while they were still on 9th Street. Anyway, BIC Construction was honored with the Commercial and Institutional Rehab Award, and Eileen visited Craig Geese in his office to hand him the plaque from PAL for their lovely work on those important buildings, really finishing an important chapter of the Haymarket story. Residential rehab, while we have residences in many buildings in Haymarket, including both of the BIC projects on the grocery wholesale houses, this typically focuses on an individual property. And this year it was what originally was the Adams House by 1909, but was built in 1905 by C.A. Schaff for Allie and Eugene Leet, and became what we know as Wayne Manor, because for half a century at least, Naomi and Bill Wayne lived in this wonderful near-south house on the 1900 block of C Street. They were great gardeners and lovers of plants. Bill was a geologist. Naomi had been a teacher, and they were dancers together, and just a wonderful couple living well into their 90s, died a year apart, both 97 years old in 2019 and 2020. A neighbor across the street, having loved the Waynes and loved her neighborhood, wanted to see this transition from that loving family to another family on the block. And that neighbor across the street was Carmen Maurer, who not only loved her block, but plants, and worked with Bill and Naomi's plant scheme was probably not one that a new owner was going to sustain, because it went from curb to alley and filled pretty much every inch of the space, but there were lots of lovely plants in that dense planting. So with neighbors, Carmen went and salvaged, and for the plant show and for neighbors to move the plants around to other lots, went with shovel and wheelbarrows and salvaged lots of lovely plant material there, and then also tackled the house to get it ready for residency. And this house not only has that nice early 20th century American Foursquare character outside, but also inside, with lovely golden oak woodwork and just all the features you want. And it became then a successful rehab project for Carmen, and she has a new owners as neighbors just up the block from her. And so the Residential Rehab Award this year I went to Carmen Maurer for 1980 C Street, the Wayne Manor, and we were delighted that Carmen was at the meeting and received her plaque from Eileen as well. Carmen's with us today as well, so. Pal is also, I think not at the very beginning, but just within a few years, added an award. There are some projects that are fascinating preservation projects or have a real strong preservation element, but are not a total rehab because the material wasn't there or that wasn't the project that was possible. The integration of old and new this year went to a unique project on a unique site that has always been an integration of old and new. And let me peel back the onion on that because it's a pretty big onion. And we have to go to P Street in the 1200 block, and we're here looking at the northeast corner of P Street. These are the south faces, and it's the little building on the right side. There was this lovely brick and limestone building on the corner. That's where the advertising firm is today, Swanson Russell. And beside was a little early apartment building of the late 1880s. We can see it here from street level, or it's the left-hand side here, a view probably taken from the Burr block, now called Centerstone, looking down north and a little bit east towards the corner of campus. And it's that 2.5-story or high basement, 2-story white building. There were 3 or 4 apartment units in it originally. It's a little ambiguous when you read the newspaper accounts of that building being built. It talks about there were 2 matching units, but a movable wall between that could be thrown together, and it sounded like maybe 4 or 5 flats in the building. So we get 2 views. We know that building fairly well in its early 1885, 1886 residential version. And this was, we don't think of 12th and P as single family or even multifamily residences really today. It's the heart of commercial downtown. But campus only went to 12th Street. Our street would be the south edge of the original campus, and this was the residential section. Where it went in its next manifestation, and I'm not ignoring Wayne, I'm going to take his question at the end because we're filming here, but we'll get to your question, Wayne. Please remember it. It became an office building in its old apartment form for Farmers Mutual Insurance Company. And they put their signs on it, they put offices right in the old residential building. That was early 20th century, the very early years of Farmers Mutual. In the 20s, they decided, well, the offices are fine, but we don't really look like an office building, and we're a growing company, and we've also given up a funny little front yard. Everybody else is building up to the property line in this commercial district, and we're sitting back from a front yard. Let's put a new front in front of it. And they commissioned A.W. Woods, Lincoln architect, to draw a limestone facade that stands about 8 or 10 or 12 feet forward of the front of the office of the old apartment building. We'd seen the steps going up to the principal floor level, which is well above the sidewalk level. You can see in these drawings, the staircase was going to take you up to the old office floor level from the sidewalk level. Here's the neoclassical limestone facade that Woods designed for the front of that building. And here it is as finished in the late 1920s. Very handsome, very rich downtown facade, just built out independent of the apartment building behind it that now is an office building. And remarkably, Swanson Russell used it that way well beyond the time they built a new building at the corner. They still had office space in the old structure behind the limestone wall. When they extended their corner building and vacated the old sort of clumsily adapted an odd floor level office building apartment made into office beside them. Neighbors looked at it and wondered, sort of like Carmen, what's going to happen in our neighborhood? Well, they were commercial neighbors, but across the street, the family that operate the shoe store, Footloose and Fancy, the Strikers, looked across at that building and thought, we could do something with that if we can save that front and put something behind it. Maybe we can build on what's there, but we need to build enough for it to be a downtown building. Well, they found as they got into it that there wasn't really much behind that front wall, and you couldn't really build on top of the 1880s apartment building made into offices, and by the end of the project they had to take down what was behind the wall. But the wall had been standing there since the 1920s, independent essentially of what was behind it anyway. So this is not one of those facadectomies where you took just the lovely front wall of some building and peeled away everything else. There wasn't anything else, in a sense, behind it. It did come down what was behind it, but they left the best part, the A.W. Woods limestone, standing in front. And on the sidewalk experience, you walk by that lovely limestone front. If you're across the street or in the parking garage, you look at the offices above. Behind that facade is the little entryway passage to what will become commercial space and the office, the apartment level entrance down at the east end. But all of that nice limestone with a insertion behind it becomes what's now called the stack, because it's got a stack of, I think, four or five levels of apartments above a commercial level on the old ground level. That was the ribbon cutting with Mayor Beitler and the Stryker family and Councilman Carl Eskridge and representatives of the Downtown Lincoln Association and Chamber, all there together in 2019, which shows how long ago it was that PAL was able to get together before. But that was the celebration of the opening of the stack, and Eileen went down and visited with Chelsea Walls, who's the store manager for the Strikers across the street, and passed on the plaque for that fascinating project, keeping that lovely quality urban front, which has been there now almost a full century, and we have a story behind it, and people can sleep in modern apartments behind the story of the front wall. Another category using the nickname for William Jennings Bryan, the Great Commoner, honors special contributions in preservation education. And this one honored not exactly a bicycle, but exhibitions within and without the walls of the Nebraska History Museum, where Sharon Kennedy was the education curator for many years, and one of her most interesting projects, especially for me, was taking an exhibit in the museum and inventing a way we could turn it into a bicycle tour through Lincoln. And we were really kind of using the city as an extension of the museum. We did a tour north and south bottoms. We did a tour to find sites of the photographs of John Johnson when that exhibit was displayed at the Historical Society, and houses that are still there or houses that are gone, or sites of houses that are gone, to give a sense of where this community lived. And the exciting ones, you could hold a picture, a Johnson picture, in front of a house and see here's where people were sitting and here's where we are today. And that was one of these great fun tours. And as Eileen's work coordinating these brown bags goes far beyond standing up at the front and saying, and now it's Jim or now it's Ed, it's also the funding, coordination with television, recruiting people, the broad array. Sharon would work with the Great Plains Trail Network to get bicycle marshals to ride along and help the safety of the tour. She'd get Should coordinate with her husband Ralph, and there would be treats along the way, and it just really made each of these an event. And Pal often cooperated in as a co-sponsor of these events as well. Even the suffrage exhibit, celebrating the 20th Amendment, we looked at it and found how could we take the Lincoln suffrage leaders, put together a map, and go around and visit their houses and figure out how to kind of put those people in that important movement into a physical place where we all live. So each of these kind of trying to open up a new way of looking at places we know. And that was, I think, a great contribution from Sharon, still an active community member. This recognized her for the Great Commoner Award, and she attended our annual meeting and received her plaque from Eileen as well. City Center Award is one that Pal, I know, was not there in the first listing, but came along a few years later, because some projects aren't preservation projects per se, but if we don't keep a vibrant, active, loved center of our city, where most of our historic resources are, we aren't going to have the resources. And so this is more focused on functions or events or activities, and that's just what the zoo is. Now, the zoo bar operates in an old building, one of the little tiny narrow storefronts, which is much of its charm. That little tiny home of the live blues since the 1970s, and really an important blues venue on the national tours. When you look at the zoo's site on Wikipedia, I don't know that I've seen a site that has more blue names on it. Meaning you can click on any name on there and they have their own page, because who's who of the blues have been at the zoo. I could do something with that. I think I've got, that's a limerick in the making. I've got 3 of the lines. Back to you later on that. Zoo Bar started with Larry Bomer, and he was an art student at the university, was interested in music, started working there, started finding ways to attract folks to come and play. He was a bartender who becomes then the owner, and until his death in 2012 was fixture at the zoo. It's quite remarkable not only who came and played there, but figures like Morris Holt, better known as Magic Slim, not only loved to play there. Magic Slim moved to Lincoln to live here because the zoo was here. He died in 2013, and in 2017 was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame. And events like the Zoo Fest that's been going on now for over 20 years. I don't know how they count either, because we all have a hiccup, an asterisk in our count in the last couple of years. But Zoo Fest brings that lovely music event outdoors into the streets of downtown Lincoln, which is exactly what City Center Award's about. And so Pal recognized the Zoo Bar, the City Center Award this year. K. Logan Peters, the elevated to president of PAL at the annual meeting, went down and met with Tim Carr, longtime employee, and gave him the plaque on behalf of the owner, Pete Waters, current owner. I think Pat had fun. That's my guess. That was a fun visit for her. PAL president in that last several years was Eileen. Can also designate an award. The category is the president picked. And the pick this year was the essential crew behind the brown bags. And that is the Link TV, LNK TV crew who make the brown bags possible, and sharing them widely with the community. When these first went on television 25, 20 years ago. And I did a few of those early ones. I thought, well, nobody will ever see this. I don't have to be nervous about it. And I'm at some meeting up in the old mayor's conference room in the old building, and a voice comes up behind me and says, I was driving the family on 27th Street, and I said, that house is a Queen Anne. I turn around, and there is our police chief, Tom Cassidy, who was watching the show. I left the library one winter evening. It was dark already, and there was somebody beside me waiting at the street light, at the traffic light. I could tell because I could smell him. And I was being urban and alert. And then he cleared his throat, and I got real alert. He said, I like those shows you do on TV. So I had from street people to street beat. So I know people watch it, and they watch it because of the city TV and the partnership between PAL and the city access TV. And so we honored Andrew and Bo and Lance and Austin. And let me go a little bit into, we now have been broadcasting, and we're broadcasting today, and for some time we'll continue, not at this History Museum, but presently from the TV studio down in County City Building. And here's Jim continuing his complete history program. We don't know what number the complete history of Lincoln includes, but he also has a unique way of spelling, which apparently I do with triennial. And if not only do these broadcast on City TV, but also then are posted on YouTube, where there are over 100 PAL videos on YouTube, over 200 subscribers, and how many then are clicking on and watching these. And sometimes if I can't find a reference, I'll think, I know I talked about that, and I'll go onto YouTube and I'll find my own show, and I'll look until I get to that spot. I'm retired, I don't have access to all my files from the office anymore as easily. So we were very pleased to honor the LNK TV crew, and Bo came and received the plaque from Eileen at the meeting. And then finally, on the award side, the big award every year, kind of the Lifetime Achievement Award, is the Busalis Award. And this is named, of course, for Lincoln Mayor Helen Busalis. For many years was trustee of the National Trust for Historic Preservation between 1988 and 1997. She was very active in preservation, promoted it as the mayor. And I started in the city just after she'd been mayor, but she would still call me up and tell me what to do. And part of what she told me what to do is I had to help get a private preservation group going. I would say, Mayor, I'm the city side, that would be a citizen group. Oh, Ed, no, you have to help get it going. So I did. And PAL is an outgrowth of Helen telling me I should do that. She then every year would call up and say, after I'd asked her for permission to use her name on the award, she'd call every year and say, how much do I donate in support of that award? I said, that's not what we asked for. We just asked for your good name. And then she'd send a check. And so she was a continual supporter through her life, and died in 2009, and still should be remembered and is remembered by PAL as a founding force preservation in Lincoln. And this year we managed to surprise our own longtime PAL treasurer and recently retired professor and director of UNL Community and Regional Planning Program, Gordon Scholes. He served 46 years in the College of Architecture, 29 in leadership of the planning program. He's a planner with a master's in planning, has a master's in architecture. I didn't know that he also has an MBA. That's a trifecta. And is a longtime member of was a longtime member of Lincoln's Urban Design Committee and still does volunteer service for that group. He's been PAL's board member and treasurer for so long, I don't think we know the number of years, and the books are always good and clean. The bills are paid. He's a volunteer, he's a mentor, and if you know Gordon, he's a consummate gentleman. He attended, and we did surprise him, I think, with the Busalis Award this year from Eileen at the meeting. And here was sort of a roster of the award winners. Now, just before I finish up, because we've got a few minutes left, and then I'll see if there are any questions, and I'll repeat the questions so TV and stream can hear it as well. But here was a roster of the winners with Eileen. We also talked about, as we often do, we try to choose a site for these meetings that's a preservation site, either one that needs rehab or has just been rehabbed. Sometimes it's been both. We visited Whittier a couple times and then got to go back to Whittier after it was back in use again. Well, they've just finished the work, and John Sampson was very generous to allow PAL to hold the meeting there. Jerry Berggren, longtime Lincoln architect, is also a longtime resident of Sky Park Manor. They cleared all the residents out to get the rehab done on the building because the degree of what they had to do really couldn't be done with it occupied. Some of the residents stayed in other Sampson properties. Others got assistance from Sampson to new residents, and then some are coming back, including Jerry. So he spoke about the building and about the architect Selmer Soltheim, and also helped lead tours through the building at the end of the program. Here we're up on the top floor, space turned into an exercise room with just spectacular views east to the Capitol. Visited the penthouse units, and here's Allison Alber, who is the project manager for Sampson and PAL's key liaison for holding the event. Also guided a tour of the apartments. This is Solheim and his wife in their penthouse unit in the 1965 Omaha World Herald. Maybe not decorated exactly as you would expect an international style architect in a kind of mid-century modern building, but he was also pulling in elements. His woodwork was by Keats Lorenz. He had a marble mantelpiece from an historic building. So all kinds of elements combined there. And we got to visit that unit in its modern condition. So it was a great event for PAL and for the attendees and for the truly spectacular views that building provides of the Capitol just less than a block away. So that was the 2022 triennial meeting. We're not going to wait 3 more years, we hope, for the next meeting, but it was a great event, and PAL was very pleased to be back with the community and sharing the award program again. If we have questions here, I'll repeat them, and we'll see if then we can hear them. We've got a little time for those. Mr. Bowles, would you have a question, sir?
One of the photographs, I can't remember the name of the building that you were showing, but in the background it looked like it might have been an older version of the state capitol. Is that true? Do you remember seeing one of the older state capitol buildings in the background of one of the photos?
Trying to remember one that I would have done that. Wayne's asking, did one of the photos, and this is why he was not being a bit rude, he was trying to ask his question right in the flow of the presentation, and I ignored him. I didn't ignore him. I wrote over him. Well, certainly it was not there in the background of the Sky Park Manor, which is our building closest to the Capitol, because it's 1960, so Capitol was 30 years in place by then. We'll have to look, Wayne. I don't remember one that I had the second Capitol showing. It'd have to be the second Capitol, I think. Certainly, my early views of the stack were back to the 1880s, but I was always looking north, and that was probably the view from the top of the Burr block looking north and east. And what you're seeing in the far background there is not the Capitol, but what was originally the private dormitory that Jim McKee spoke about last month for PAL. It sat up about where Bancroft School was later built, about 16th and U Street, and was later a convent and a private hospital, and then was torn down. Bancroft was built there, became Bancroft Hall of the university, and now it's some green space up on about where the health center is, or a little bit west of that. But that's what had the cupola on top, and you were seeing that building, I think, off on the horizon. Yeah, I get to the answer. I sometimes have to, really work to get there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions today? I think this has been our first time that PAL's attempted live streaming of the program during the program, so we tried to start right on time. We'll make a habit of that if we're live streaming, and this will also come back on YouTube, and this will be shown on City TV and then on YouTube for a long time, we hope. So that was PAL Awards for 2022. Thanks for coming.